So there are three exceptions to this. And the three exceptions to the things that you don't talk about. And the first exception is that you can talk about some of these when you're planning an action with an affinity group in a secure fashion. And so, what a secure fashion means will vary depending on what kind of actions you're talking about. But what this means is that, an affinity group is people you've trusted, it's people you trust, people you've screened. And a secure fashion means, probably that you're not emailing about it, as other people have already pointed out today. Anything that's online is basically unsafe. Anything that's, even over the telephone is unsafe. So this is mostly kind of face-to-face discussions. Another exception is talking about past actions. So if you've already been, or if a person has already been arrested and convicted. So if someone has, been to jail and they've kind of done their time, then they might come out afterward and say, well, this is how we did this. A lot of people from the Weather Underground or from, direct action in Canada, like Anne Hansen, this is kind of how we actually learned a lot about how groups in the past have worked and what they did wrong. So that's actually really important to kind of learn from those groups. And of course, again, this is something that people need to be careful about because there are cases where, maybe only one or two people have been arrested from a group. So obviously they don't want to incriminate other kind of comrades of theirs. And there are even cases where this hasn't worked out so well. So Ron Coronado, the well-known environmental and animal rights activist, was giving a talk a few years ago about an arson that he'd been, caught and convicted, and he'd already spent time in jail. And someone asked him a question at a lecture about how he'd started the fire. And he said, oh, well, I took this bottle and so forth. And then after that, he was arrested and charged and again sent to jail. So this is not, some kind of ironclad guarantee that everything's going to be okay. These are conditional exceptions that you should think about critically and intelligently. And of course, the last exception, the third exception, is anonymous letters or communiques to the media that often, if a group is underground, it has limited communications. It wants to explain why it's done something or why it's targeted a specific, company or facility or something like that. Then they might want to send an anonymous communique or letter. And that's, again, if a group wants to do that, then they're going to have to be pretty careful about making sure that it's actually anonymous and that they're stripping out any kind of clues or identifying information. So these rules are fairly straightforward. So why do people breach them? Well, sometimes, of course, they just don't know, in which case it's our job to help educate and inform people in the community about these rules. But there are other reasons that people will kind of fail to follow these guidelines when they actually do know about them or when they should know better. And of course, one reason is gossip or speculation. So, oh, did you see, that spray painting last night down by the arson site? I wonder who did that. That's not okay, or to speculate or guess, because you never really know who's listening or who this kind of gossip and rumors might go back to, and it could end up getting people in a lot of trouble. Asking inappropriate questions. So sometimes people are just really curious, like, oh, have you ever done anything underground? Have you done anything like that? That's not okay to ask people about as a general rule. You shouldn't kind of try to get that information that you don't need to know. Lying or bragging to gain cred or credibility. So people saying, oh yeah, I've done some pretty big stuff back in the day. That is also not okay, unless it's this kind of second exception that we talked about. It's not a good idea to brag about things that you've done, and if someone is bragging about illegal actions they've undertaken, you probably don't want to be in a group with them anyway. Of course, drugs or alcohol. People might get drunk or something and talk about things they don't want to, or they shouldn't, starting or passing on rumors. And then, of course, some people breach security culture because they're informers or infiltrators, people who've been hired or paid or threatened or cajoled into passing information on to those in power. So what do we do about these breaches in security culture, or what do we do when people don't follow these rules? And I think there's a reasonable escalation that should be followed. The first act, of course, is to educate people. So if someone says something that's appropriate or inappropriate and that breaks good security culture rules, probably one of the first things that you should do is kind of address it tactfully, maybe in private, depending on the circumstances, and say, you know, I think that what you did was maybe a breach of good security culture, or what you said or asked there made me really uncomfortable because, and then maybe point them on to other good resources about security culture so that they can learn more, or, you know, hand them a copy of a security culture booklet, that sort of thing. And it's really important not to let kind of these breaches of security culture become habit, because I think it's really important if someone does something to, you know, immediately say, oh, stop, and okay, let's talk about that for a second. Because as soon as it becomes, you know, a frequent habit, then it becomes really much more difficult to intervene and to kind of change the behavior or change the status quo. Now, some people become chronic violators. No matter what you say, no matter how you try to intervene, they keep breaking security culture rules. They ask questions that are inappropriate. They speculate about illegal actions or about people. You know, they share information that shouldn't be shared. And these people can act as unwitting informers. You know, even if they're not a police infiltrator, they can pass on information or rumors or talk about it over the phone, or if the information gets where it shouldn't get, even if that information has no basis in reality. And so what you usually have to do for someone like this, if you're in a political group, is to ask them to leave the group, or to ask them to leave the organizing space, which can seem cruel, but it's also cruel for someone to be arrested or go to jail when they don't need to. So, you know, breaking security culture or violations of security culture it's an issue that makes our communities unsafe. But the main issue is really not about the people, it's about the behavior. So, you know, breaking security culture is one way that a group can be disrupted, but there are lots of bad behaviors and lots of abusive behaviors that can be really damaging to communities in general. You know, sexism, racism, and all of these other things that happen and that we have to deal with. And that kind of abusive behavior or that kind of sexist behavior often overlaps with infiltrators and informers. So, you know, the FBI's counterintelligence program dating back to the 1960s, they've really tried to use, you know, sexism and racism and other hostilities to drive wedges between different classes of people, different groups who should have been getting along, between different individuals in a really destructive way. And there's a sense in which it is not actually that important if a person is, you know, supposedly an infiltrator, or whether they're just being really badly behaved and destructive. You still have to address that. Most of the time, you're not going to be able to find out whether someone is an infiltrator, and there's not much point in speculating. So, you know, of course, this is different groups use different standards. So, you know, if a group is kind of treading the line, if it's an above-ground group that's going to undertake riskier activities for its members, or if they're more visible in some way, then they're probably going to want to set, you know, kind of tighter security guidelines and tighter boundaries. And it's okay to set boundaries. You know, it's okay to say that people who are behaving badly should not be part of the group. I think that's something that on the left we're often not very good at. We want people to feel kind of included and welcome and that sort of thing. But what I've seen in the past happen with that is, you know, you'll have a group of 10 people and someone really badly behaved will come in, and people will say, oh, I don't know if we should really kick them out, or I don't know if we should stop them because everyone belongs. And then 5 other people will be so, you know, offended by that they'll leave, or the group will just get torn apart. So I think we have to, you know, think these things through.